The city was always loud, even in the mornings. Cars hummed and honked along the wide avenues, buses hissed as they pulled up to the curb, and footsteps echoed across the cracked pavement. Brookside Towers, one of the tallest apartment complexes on the west side of the city, loomed like a silent sentinel above it all. Glass reflected the pale sunlight, while the revolving doors spun endlessly as tenants rushed in and out. And just outside those doors, always outside, never inside, stood an old man with a bundle of lottery tickets clutched in his wrinkled hands. His name, though few bothered to ask, was Robert Hayes. To most, he was simply the ticket seller. He wore the same coat every day, a grey wool garment whose seams had begun to fray, with patches stitched along the elbows where fabric had worn thin. His shoes were scuffed, soles nearly smooth from years of walking. His cap, pulled low against the morning chill, shaded eyes that once had burned with ambition but now looked tired, though never entirely dimmed. "Lottery tickets," he muttered, in a voice roughened by age and disuse. "Just $1. Change your luck today." People passed him quickly. Some averted their gaze as though ashamed to look at him too closely, as though poverty were contagious. Others offered a tight, polite smile and kept moving. The wealthy residents of Brookside Towers often didn't notice him at all. They were too busy juggling phone calls, shepherding children to school, or adjusting their silk ties before stepping into sleek black cars waiting at the curb. Occasionally, a kind soul would pause long enough to buy 1 or 2 tickets. They almost never scratched them there, too afraid of the awkward silence if they won nothing. Instead, they stuffed the tickets into purses or briefcases and hurried away, their act of charity complete. To most, Robert was background scenery, like the pigeons on the lamppost or the rusting hydrant at the corner. He was simply there, a man reduced to a fixture. But when the day's noise softened, when the sun began to sink behind the glass towers, Robert often found himself staring up at the very building whose entrance he guarded. His eyes followed the rows of windows that sparkled with reflected fire from the sunset. Sometimes he would pause, tilting his head slightly as though listening. For behind those walls, behind the facade of luxury and security, there were elevators humming, steel and cable, piston and brake, the familiar symphony of machinery. Most people heard nothing but a low drone when they stepped inside those elevators. But Robert heard the language of machines. He knew the rhythm of a properly balanced cab, the sigh of hydraulic pressure releasing, the click of safety gears locking into place. These were sounds that had once defined his life, back when he was not an invisible man with tickets in his hand, but someone who built the very veins of the city. Yet none of the hurried strangers passing him each day could imagine such a truth. For them, Robert was nothing more than an old man struggling to earn a few coins. The weight of silence. On some mornings, children would glance at him curiously as their parents tugged them along. A little boy once whispered, "Why does that man stand here every day?" His mother hushed him quickly. "Don't stare, honey. He's unfortunate." Robert had learned to accept such things with quiet dignity. He never snapped at the children, never protested the pitying looks. Instead, he offered the boy a small smile, one the child probably didn't even notice. When the winter winds came, slicing through his coat and chilling his brittle bones, Robert remained in his corner. The thought of staying home in his small, dimly lit apartment frightened him more than the cold. The silence inside those 4 walls reminded him too much of all he had lost. At least on the street, there was life. There was the possibility, however small, that someone might look him in the eye, hand him $1, and exchange a word. He needed that small reminder that he still existed, invisible to the world. Despite his worn appearance, Robert carried himself with a certain posture. He didn't shuffle like some of the other men who begged on the sidewalks. He didn't plead for spare change or hold out a paper cup. No, Robert sold. He offered something, however small. His pride demanded that distinction. Still, pride did not erase the ache of invisibility. Sometimes, when an executive in a sharp suit brushed past him, as though he were air, Robert would feel the weight of being forgotten, pressed down like a physical force. He had once shaken hands with men in similar suits, debated engineering schematics across polished oak tables. He had once been a man whose phone calls were answered, whose opinions shaped the skyline. But that was another life. The spark beneath the ashes. Though he rarely let it show, there was still a spark inside Robert, a small, smoldering ember of the man he used to be. He kept it hidden, almost afraid of it. After all, what good was an engineer's mind when his hands shook and his days were spent selling luck to strangers? Yet the ember burned whenever he heard the mechanical sigh of elevators inside Brookside Towers. Each whir, each groan of steel reminded him that knowledge doesn't vanish, skills don't evaporate, they live inside you, waiting. Sometimes, as he packed up unsold tickets at the end of the day, he would glance at the building's lobby and whisper under his breath, "I know you. I built you." No one ever heard the shadow of tomorrow. On the surface, nothing about Robert's days seemed destined to change. Each morning mirrored the one before. The same corner, the same bundle of tickets, the same indifference from passers-by. His life had flattened into routine, a dull echo of what had once been. But beneath that routine lay the possibility of something else. Fate has a way of drawing forgotten men into the spotlight when least expected, and for Robert Hayes, that spotlight was coming soon. In just a few days, the man whom everyone dismissed as useless would be the only one standing between a child and disaster. But for now, he remained at his corner, invisible to the world, yet listening, always listening, to the heartbeat of the machines inside the tower. Long before he stood outside Brookside Towers with a bundle of lottery tickets, Robert Hayes was a man people listened to. His name once appeared on engineering reports, design patents, and blueprints that guided the construction of elevators in some of the busiest cities in America. He had not always been invisible. In the 1970s and 80s, Robert was a rising figure in mechanical engineering. He joined a prestigious firm in New York after graduating from Purdue, where his professors praised his meticulous attention to detail and his deep respect for safety. Where others saw machines as mere metal, Robert saw living systems. He used to tell his colleagues, "An elevator isn't just steel and cable. It's a promise that mothers can carry their babies safely, that workers can reach the top floor and return home, that people can trust the ground won't betray them." It was this philosophy that made him respected, even admired, in an industry often obsessed with speed and cost-cutting. When a developer wanted to push limits, Robert reminded them that one faulty cable could mean dozens of lives. And though his stance sometimes cost the firm lucrative contracts, Robert refused to compromise. By the time he was in his 40s, his designs could be found in office towers, hotels, and hospitals across the country. He never sought fame, but whenever he saw his blueprints come alive in glass and steel, he felt a quiet pride, a life of balance. Beyond his career, Robert had a modest but happy life. His wife, Elaine, was a teacher with a gentle laugh and an unwavering belief in his work. They lived in a small brownstone apartment in Queens, filled with books and small mementos from their travels. They had no children, but their life was rich in quiet rituals. Sunday morning breakfasts, evening walks, and the occasional trip to the theater when Robert could leave work early. Elaine used to tease him that he loved elevators more than anything else. "Not more than you," Robert would reply, kissing her hand. "Maybe just as much," she'd laugh, eyes sparkling. Those were golden years. Years when Robert believed the future stretched upward, as endless as the towers he helped design. The cracks appear, but the world changes, and not always in ways a man can control. By the mid-1990s, automation and aggressive competition shifted the industry. Companies began favoring younger engineers willing to work for lower salaries, men and women eager to impress with bold but risky designs. Safety was often treated as a secondary concern, hidden beneath glossy presentations promising efficiency and innovation. Robert, then in his late 50s, stood firm. He refused to approve projects that cut corners. At first, his colleagues respected his stance, but soon, whispers began. "He's too cautious. He slows down deals. Maybe he's not keeping up with the times." At home, another battle was quietly unfolding. Elaine was diagnosed with breast cancer. Treatment was long, expensive, and draining. Robert balanced nights at the hospital with long days at the firm. He poured his heart into protecting her, but in doing so, his grip on work began to slip. When the company downsized after a merger, Robert's name appeared on the list of those let go. No ceremony, no farewell. Just a letter thanking him for years of service. He had given them 3 decades. They gave him a severance check that barely covered a year's rent. Loss and loneliness. Elaine's health declined quickly after that. Robert spent his savings on treatments, praying for a miracle. He sold their brownstone, moved into a small apartment near the hospital, and watched as the woman who had been his anchor slowly slipped away. When she passed, the silence of the apartment swallowed him whole. Grief doesn't always arrive with tears. Sometimes it arrives as a kind of numbness, a quiet erasure of will. Robert tried to return to work, but no one wanted to hire a man in his 60s. His resume was impressive, but the world saw only his age. Interviews ended with polite smiles. "We'll be in touch." They never were. Bills piled up. Savings vanished. He found himself on the edge of eviction, stripped of everything that had once defined him. His career, his wife, his home. The descent into shadows. It was a neighbor who first suggested selling lottery tickets. "It's not glamorous, but it keeps you on your feet. Better than nothing." So Robert began to stand on corners, at first ashamed, then resigned. With each ticket he sold, he felt further from the man he once was. But survival left little room for pride, and the city barely noticed his transformation. To them, he had always been an old man. No one saw the decades of work, the blueprints that still guided elevators carrying thousands safely each day. No one saw the late nights at drafting tables, or the passion that once burned in him like a furnace. The world only saw the shell, the ticket seller, the secret that remained. Yet, despite everything, Robert never stopped noticing. Whenever he passed a building, he tilted his head, listening to the hum of its elevators. He could tell, just from the rhythm, whether the brakes were aligned or the counterweights balanced. His mind, though battered by grief, still carried every calculation, every instinct. He didn't talk about it. Who would listen? But in his heart, Robert knew he hadn't forgotten. Sometimes, standing outside Brookside Towers, he would rest his hand against the glass as residents rode past in the elevators inside. He would whisper to himself, "I know you, I built you, and I still know how to keep you safe." He never imagined anyone would need that knowledge again. Saturday afternoons at Brookside Towers were usually calm. Families came and went, some heading to the park, others carrying bags of groceries from the market down the street. The lobby, with its polished marble floor and gleaming glass doors, always carried the faint scent of expensive perfume and fresh polish. The doormen stood at their posts in neatly pressed uniforms, greeting residents with rehearsed courtesy. On this particular afternoon, however, the air shifted from routine calm to sharp chaos in the space of a single scream. "Help! Please, somebody help! My daughter's in there!" Heads turned. A mother stood near the elevator shaft, her hands pounding against the closed doors. Her voice cracked with desperation. From behind the metal, muffled sobs could be heard, the cries of a young girl trapped inside. People rushed from all sides. Residents spilled into the lobby, their weekend errands forgotten. 2 security guards pushed through, their radios buzzing as they scrambled to assess the situation. "What happened?" one asked that seat breathlessly. She got into the elevator alone," the mother stammered. "It jerked. It just stopped. She's inside, and I can't..." Her words dissolved into sobs as she pressed her forehead to the cold metal. The elevator's display panel flickered uncertainly, its numbers frozen between floors. A faint, grinding noise emanated from within the shaft, an unsettling groan of strained machinery. The child inside let out another frightened wail. The crowd swelled, tenants whispered anxiously, some pulling out phones to record, others dialing for emergency help. Children clung to their parents' legs, wide-eyed. The marble lobby, usually filled with idle chatter, now echoed with panic. The guards struggled. The guards rushed to the control panel. One frantically pressed buttons in sequence, hoping the machine would respond. The other barked into his radio. "Control room, do you copy? We have a stuck elevator, passenger trapped inside. Send maintenance immediately." Static answered. The guards exchanged nervous glances. "Try the reset switch," one said. They pulled a key, turned it sharply, and jabbed at the call buttons. Nothing. The elevator gave a violent shudder, then went still. The grinding noise intensified, like metal teeth gnashing against each other. The little girl's voice rose higher. "Mommy, Mommy, I'm scared." The mother's scream tore through the air. "Do something, please." And the old man at the edge. At the far corner of the lobby, near the revolving doors, Robert Hayes stood with his bundle of lottery tickets. He had been invisible, as always, when the chaos erupted, just another forgotten figure on the fringe of people's lives. But now, as the lobby filled with panic, his body stiffened. To anyone else, the noise from the shaft was meaningless, just frightening clamor. To Robert, it was language. He recognized it instantly. the sharp whine of an unbalanced brake, the uneven pull of a counterweight strained past its design. The vibration in the floor beneath his worn shoes told him something the guards did not know. The system was seconds away from complete failure. His grip tightened around the tickets. He could almost see the blueprint in his mind. The hydraulic valve, the safety release, the manual override buried beneath dust in the lobby's corner panel. He knew what had to be done. But another sound filled his ears, the whispers of the crowd. Who's going to fix this? Where are the technicians? This is hopeless. Robert's throat constricted. He wanted to shout, to command attention like he once did in boardrooms and on construction sites. But doubt coiled around him. To these people, he was no engineer, only a poor old man, a ticket seller. Would they even listen? The little girl screamed again. Her voice cut through every hesitation. The pressure builds. Technicians are on their way, one guard yelled, trying to calm the mother. Just give it 15, maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes? The mother cried, her face pale with horror. She won't last in there. Can't you hear it? The whole thing's... Another loud jolt interrupted her. The elevator slammed against its rails with a metallic clang. The child shrieked. The crowd recoiled, murmurs rising into shouts. Do something! She's going to die in there. The guards froze, paralyzed by their own lack of training. One picked up his phone, fumbling as he tried to call the fire department. The other kept pounding the useless buttons. And Robert felt his body move before his mind could argue further. He stepped forward, pushing through the stunned onlookers until he stood at the edge of the scene. The engineer speaks. Stop pressing those buttons, he said, his voice suddenly clear, carrying an authority that startled even himself. You're making it worse. The guards turned. One frowned. Old man, stay back. This isn't your business. Robert didn't flinch. He pointed toward the far wall where a dusty metal box sat half forgotten. There, the manual hydraulic release. Turn it counterclockwise. It'll stabilize the cab. The guard blinked, confused. How do you... Just do it, Robert barked, his tone commanding, the voice of a man who had once given orders on construction sites where hesitation meant death. The guard hesitated, then, perhaps more out of desperation than belief, ran toward the box. He fumbled it open, revealing a valve and a crank covered in grime. Counterclockwise, Robert shouted. The guard twisted. A low hiss filled the lobby. The grinding inside the shaft eased, softening into a steady hum. The elevator, once jerking violently, stilled. The crowd fell silent. Robert turned back to the doors. Now, pry them open. She's safe enough to pull out. With renewed energy, the guards forced the side panels apart. A crack widened, revealing the terrified face of the little girl. Tears streaked her cheeks, her tiny hands pounding weakly against the door. Hold on, sweetheart, her mother cried, reaching through the gap. With one final shove, the doors screeched open wide enough to pull her out. The girl collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing. The crowd erupted. Gasps, sighs as of relief, even applause. The danger was over, and in the center of it all stood Robert Hayes, breathing hard, lottery tickets still clutched in his trembling hand. The shift in eyes. For the first time in years, people stared at him, but not with pity, not with dismissal. Their eyes were wide with shock, curiosity, and something else, respect. Who is he? Someone whispered. The mother, tears streaming down her cheeks, turned to Robert. You saved my daughter's life. How did you know what to do? Robert swallowed hard. Words caught in his throat. For so long, he had lived in silence, his past hidden like a secret shame. But now, in this moment, with dozens of eyes on him, he felt the weight of truth pressing to be spoken. He looked at the mother, at the little girl, clutching her tightly, and finally said, softly but firmly, "I used to design them. Elevators. I built systems like this one." The crowd gasped. Murmurs rippled through the lobby. The old man with the lottery tickets, the man they thought useless, was someone entirely different. The lobby of Brookside Towers had never been so quiet. Only moments ago, it had been filled with frantic screams, the rattling groan of machinery, and the panicked voices of a dozen people shouting over each other. Now, silence pressed against the walls like a thick fog. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the same figure, the frail old man with the patched coat, standing at the center of the lobby, a crumpled bundle of lottery tickets still clutched in one hand. His chest rose and fell with measured breaths, his eyes calm despite the chaos that had just unfolded. The child had been pulled safely into her mother's arms, but the mother did not run off in relief. Instead, she remained standing before him, trembling, tears streaking down her face. Her little girl clung to her, still whimpering softly, but alive because of him. "You saved her," the woman whispered, her voice breaking. She looked at Robert as if seeing him for the first time. "You saved my daughter." Robert shifted uneasily. He had never liked the weight of attention, and in the years since he'd faded into obscurity, he had almost forgotten what it felt like. Dozens of faces stared at him now, not dismissive, not pitying, but wide-eyed with wonder, curiosity, and disbelief. "I just did what had to be done," he said quietly. His voice was hoarse, the words almost swallowed by the vast lobby. But the crowd pressed closer. The questions begin. "Wait!" one of the guards blurted, still holding the crank he'd used on Robert's command. His hands were greasy from dust and oil. "How did you even know about that valve? Most people who live here don't even realize it exists." Another tenant, a middle-aged man in a sharp suit, crossed his arms, suspicion mingling with awe. "Who are you?" he demanded. "You're not just some ticket seller, are you?" Robert swallowed. For years he had kept his past buried, telling no one of his work, his designs, his life before the street. To reveal it now felt like tearing open an old wound. But looking into the tear-streaked eyes of the mother, still clutching her daughter, he knew silence would only deepen the mystery. "I used to be an engineer," he said at last, his voice steadier now. "I designed elevators, systems like this one." A murmur rippled through the crowd, like wind sweeping across tall grass. "An engineer?" someone gasped. "He knew exactly what to do." "My God, he saved her life." The guards glanced at each other, shame flickering across their faces. They had been helpless, fumbling with buttons and radios, while the man they had dismissed daily as an old nuisance had solved the crisis in seconds. Robert's reluctant authority, one guard finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sir, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have snapped at you earlier. I didn't think—" "No," Robert interrupted gently, raising a hand. "You did what you could, but you weren't trained for this. None of you were." His eyes softened, and for the first time, the lobby felt less like a stage of judgment and more like a classroom. "The elevator wasn't malfunctioning at random, Miss," he explained, his tone patient, steady. "It was the safety brake. It jammed under uneven pressure. That grinding noise, that was the counterweight pulling against the rails. If we'd waited 20 minutes for a technician, or if you'd kept pressing those buttons, the brake might have given way completely." Gasps rose around him. The mother hugged her child tighter. "The emergency valve is there for a reason," Robert continued, nodding toward the dusty panel on the wall. "But most people don't even know it exists. You are seconds away from a disaster." His words hung in the air like a solemn truth. And for the first time in decades, Robert felt that old sense of authority, the kind that came from knowledge hard-earned, from responsibility shouldered. He was no longer invisible. The mother's gratitude, the mother approached him fully now, her daughter nestled against her shoulder. She reached out a trembling hand. "What's your name?" she asked softly. Robert hesitated. He almost said, "It doesn't matter." But something inside him stirred, an urge to reclaim what had been stripped away. "Robert Hayes," he said simply. The mother nodded, repeating it, as if committing it to memory. "Robert Hayes. I won't forget that name. You saved my child. You saved me." The little girl peeked up from her mother's shoulder. Her small voice was shaky but clear. "Thank you, mister." Robert felt a lump rise in his throat. He hadn't heard words of gratitude in so long. He cleared his throat, blinking back the heat behind his eyes. "You're welcome, sweetheart." The crowds shift. The lobby buzzed again, but this time with admiration instead of panic. "I can't believe it. All this time. He was here every day and none of us knew. We thought he was just..." The woman trailed off, ashamed. Robert heard the unfinished sentence anyway. Just a poor old man, just a ticket seller, just someone unworthy of notice. It stung, but he pushed the thought aside. Tonight, at least, they saw him differently. A younger man in a hoodie stepped forward awkwardly. "Mr. Hayes, do you really mean you designed elevators? Like the ones in this city?" Robert gave a faint smile. "Yes, some of them anyway. I spent most of my life making sure they worked safely. That was my job." The young man shook his head in disbelief. That's incredible." Inside Robert's heart, even as the crowd buzzed with astonishment, Robert's mind wandered. He remembered long nights hunched over drafting tables, the smell of ink and coffee, the sound of his wife's voice urging him to get some rest. He remembered standing at construction sites, shouting over the clank of steel as he guided younger engineers. For a moment, he was back there, respected, needed, alive. And now, in this strange twist of fate, he had tasted that life again. Not in a boardroom, not in a firm, but in the marble lobby of a building that had once ignored him. The ember inside him, the one that had smoldered in silence for years, glowed brighter. The guard's regret. One of the guards finally stepped forward, his voice low. "Mr. Hayes, I owe you an apology. I've waved you off before, treated you like you didn't belong here. And yet today, you did more than I could have ever done." Robert looked at him kindly. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them." The guard nodded, humbled. The world reawakened slowly. The crowd dispersed, though not without lingering glances back at Robert. Some patted his shoulder as they passed. Others whispered his name. And though the lobby returned to its rhythm, something fundamental had shifted. Robert Hayes was no longer invisible. He stood alone again near the doors, his lottery tickets still unsold, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time in a long while, he felt that he mattered. News travelled quickly in Brookside Towers. By the next morning, whispers about the old ticket seller had already begun weaving through the hallways, the elevators, and the breakfast tables of its many residents. Children who had witnessed the chaos recounted the scene with wide-eyed dramatics. He just pointed, and the guard did what he said, and the elevator stopped. Adults, though less theatrical, carried the same disbelief in their voices. "Did you hear about the little girl yesterday?" a woman asked her neighbor in the laundry room. "That old man, the one always outside selling tickets, he saved her. Said he used to be an engineer." Her neighbor scoffed. "An engineer? Him? You must have misunderstood." "No," the woman insisted. "I was there. He knew exactly what to do. The guards were useless, but he commanded the whole room." The neighbor's expression softened. "Well, maybe there's more to him than we thought." And just like that, the narrative began to shift. The spreading rumor. At the corner cafe, where residents gathered for morning coffee, the story grew with each telling. Some painted Robert as a retired genius, others as a fallen inventor. A few doubted altogether. "I think he just got lucky," muttered a skeptical man, stirring his cappuccino. "Probably saw something like it on TV once. People exaggerate in emergencies." But an older gentleman sitting nearby leaned forward. "Lucky? No, I heard the sound myself. That grinding in the shaft, it was bad. He knew what it was instantly. I worked in construction for 30 years. You don't guess at something like that." At the mention of construction, heads turned. The rumor gained weight. Doubt began to erode. Echoes of recognition that afternoon. A retired architect named Mr. Lawson, who lived on the 14th floor, joined a conversation in the lobby. He had been quietly listening to the younger residents marvel about the old man when he finally spoke. "Robert Hayes," he said, tasting the name slowly. "That sounds familiar." The group turned to him. "You know him?" Lawson adjusted his glasses. "Not personally, but years ago I worked on several high-rise projects in Manhattan. The firms often brought in elevator specialists. I remember the name Hayes on a set of blueprints once. Mechanical engineer, very precise man, if I recall correctly, obsessed with safety." The young residents fell silent, glancing at one another. The rumor had just gained confirmation. Robert, alone. While his name was carried on whispers, he did not hear. Robert sat in his small apartment across town, staring at the drawing a little girl had given him earlier that morning. It was simple. Crayon lines forming the shape of a building, a box with a smiling face inside labeled "Me," and next to it, a thin, tall figure with a cap, smiling too. Above it, the child had scrawled in crooked letters, "Thank you, Mr. Robert." He traced the lines with a trembling finger. He could not remember the last time someone had thanked him so openly. But alongside the warmth, there was unease. The attention unsettled him. For years he had hidden in plain sight, content with invisibility. To be seen again felt dangerous, as though it might reopen old wounds he had spent decades trying to bury. Conflicting feelings. That evening, as he returned to Brookside to sell tickets, something felt different. People didn't pass him as quickly. Some slowed their pace. A few nodded. One even stopped to say, "Good evening, Mr. Hayes." The words caught him off guard. Mr. Hayes. Not sir, not old man, not silence. His name. He gave a polite nod back, though inside, turmoil churned. Part of him wanted to disappear again, to retreat into anonymity. Attention was a burden he no longer craved. But another part, the part that still remembered standing proudly at drafting tables, guiding young engineers, felt a flicker of pride. The mother returns. Later that night, as the lobby grew quiet, the mother whose child he had saved appeared again. She carried a small paper bag, the kind from a bakery. "I brought you something," she said softly, offering it to him. Robert hesitated. "You don't need to." "I want to," she interrupted gently. Her daughter peeked from behind her, shy but smiling. Inside the bag was a warm loaf of bread wrapped in wax paper. Robert stared at it for a long moment, overwhelmed. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice low. The mother touched his arm. "You saved my little girl's life. I can never repay that. But please know that we see you now. We know who you are." Her words pierced him. For years, he had felt erased. Now, suddenly, he was remembered. The weight of memory that night. Robert walked home under the orange glow of streetlights, his mind flooded with memories. Elaine's laughter, the drafting tables, the blueprints signed with his name. He remembered being young, ambitious, certain that his work mattered. And now, decades later, strangers were speaking his name again, some with awe, some with regret. The shame of his decline weighed on him still, but beneath it, pride flickered stubbornly. Perhaps his life had not been wasted. Perhaps, even in obscurity, he had never truly been useless. The days following the elevator incident brought subtle but unmistakable changes to Brookside Towers. Where once Robert Hayes had stood invisible, a fixture of the sidewalk with his worn coat and bundle of lottery tickets, now people paused. They looked at him differently. The first change came from the security guards. The same men who once waved him off, irritated at his presence near the building's gleaming entrance, now greeted him with quiet respect. One morning, as Robert arranged his tickets on the small wooden board he carried, a guard approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Mr. Hayes," the guard said, awkward but sincere, "thought you might like this. Black, no sugar." Someone said, "That's how you take it." Robert blinked in surprise. He hadn't told anyone that. Not since Elaine had brought him coffee that way every morning decades ago. He accepted the cup slowly, nodding. "Thank you." It was a simple gesture, yet it spoke volumes. Children's voices. The children, too, saw him differently now. They no longer giggled or asked their parents why that old man stood outside every day. Instead, they waved. A few even stopped to chat. One afternoon, a boy of about 10 tugged his father's sleeve. "Dad, that's the man who saved Emily, right?" His father, usually one to hurry past, nodded with respect. "Yes, that's Mr. Hayes." The boy walked over shyly. "Mister, I want to be an engineer too someday, like you." Robert felt his chest tighten. He crouched slightly, wincing at the ache in his knees, and smiled at the boy. "Then, promise me this. You build things that keep people safe. That's what matters most." The boy nodded solemnly, as if accepting a sacred mission, before running back to his father. A new kind of business. Even the way people bought tickets changed. Once they had bought out of pity or guilt, avoiding eye contact. Now neighbors came deliberately, handing him money with genuine conversation. "How are you today, Mr. Hayes?" "Cold morning, isn't it? Did you hear the news? Another building downtown? using Hayes elevators, imagine that. Robert was stunned to realize he was selling more tickets than he ever had. But the money wasn't what mattered. It was the conversations, the acknowledgement. For years, silence had been his constant companion. Now he felt something unfamiliar yet welcome: connection. The mother and daughter. The mother and her little girl visited often. Sometimes they brought food, sometimes just a smile. The girl would run up, waving a crayon drawing or a small trinket she wanted to show him. One afternoon, she pressed a small, shiny object into his palm. It was a toy elevator she had built from blocks and glue, crooked but full of effort. "It's for you," she said, "so you don't forget us." Robert's throat tightened. He looked down at the toy in his hand, then at the child's earnest face. He knelt and whispered, "No, little one. It's so I'll always remember you." The mother's eyes filled with tears as she watched. She knew perhaps more than anyone what this moment meant, for her daughter and for Robert. Inside Robert's heart. At night, in his small apartment, Robert often sat by the window with the child's drawing taped to the wall and the toy elevator resting on his table. He would sip his coffee and let the city's hum drift through the glass. For so long, he had carried shame like a burden, convinced that he had vanished into irrelevance. But the events of the past week had cracked open a truth he had almost forgotten. Worth does not disappear with time. Knowledge does not vanish when paychecks stop. Dignity cannot be erased by circumstance. He remembered Elaine. He imagined her gentle voice, her laughter, her unwavering belief in him. Perhaps, he thought, she had been right all along. "You will always matter, Robert, even if no one sees it." Now, finally, others did see it. Recognition without fame. No newspaper ever wrote about him. No headlines announced the engineer ticket seller who saved a child. The story stayed within Brookside Towers, passed from mouth to mouth, etched into the memories of those who lived there. And that was enough. Robert didn't crave fame. He didn't need applause. What he had wanted, without even realizing it, was to be seen as more than a shadow on the sidewalk. And now, when neighbors greeted him warmly, when children looked up at him with admiration, when the mother nodded at him with quiet gratitude, he felt something deeper than recognition. He felt, remembered the final moment. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange behind the skyscrapers, Robert stood at his usual spot outside the towers. His coat hung heavy on his shoulders, his tickets neatly stacked, but his posture was different. Straighter, stronger. He looked up at the building, watching the elevators glide smoothly behind glass. He closed his eyes, listening. The familiar hum, the rhythm of steel and cables. It was like hearing an old friend's heartbeat. He whispered softly to himself, "I built you. I built so many of you. And you're still here, still carrying lives, just like me." As he opened his eyes, he saw people passing by, neighbors who nodded, smiled, even stopped to greet him. One child waved. The mother, from that fateful day, raised her hand in acknowledgement. And for the first time in years, Robert Hayes allowed himself to smile fully, deeply, without restraint. Sometimes it takes only one moment to remind the world who you are. And sometimes it takes only one moment to remind yourself.